Hey guys, and welcome back to Pursuit Bible Church. We're so glad to have you with us, whether you're in the room or watching wherever you are. And this week we're still in Genesis 26, and we're going through verses 12 to 25. You can turn there while I do a quick preamble. In the course of history, some of the fiercest conflicts haven't been fought over gold or oil. They've been fought over water. In a desert, whoever controls the well controls life itself. That's not an exaggeration. In the ancient Near East, a well wasn't just geography, it was survival, wealth, a claim to the future. Keep that in mind as we walk through this text, because today we're dealing with a section of scripture where wells are doing a lot more theological work than they first appear to. Here's where we're headed. Isaac never secures God's promises by winning the fight for water. He secures them by trusting the God who doesn't need him to win. So Genesis 26, and starting from verse 12. When Isaac planted his crops that year, he harvested 100 times more grain than he planted, for the Lord blessed him. He became a very rich man, and his wealth continued to grow. He acquired so many flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle and servants, that the Philistines became jealous of him. So the Philistines filled up all of Isaac's wells with dirt. These were the wells that had been dug by the servants of his father Abraham. Finally, Abimelech ordered Isaac to leave the country. "Go somewhere else," he said, "for you have become too powerful for us." So last week we saw that the reason Isaac settled in Gerar was due to a famine. Abimelech made the decree that no one should touch Isaac and Rebekah after a series of complicated events, and now we find ourselves here. If we look closely at verse 12, this wasn't just a good harvest. 100-fold return during a famine, while everyone around him was struggling, borders on the miraculous. Isaac isn't succeeding because he found some clever farming technique the Philistines missed. He's succeeding because the Lord blessed him in conditions where blessings shouldn't have been possible. That's the whole point of the chapter in a miniature. God's covenant promise to Isaac was never dependent on the weather. Isaac didn't plant because the ground looked promising. He planted because the promise in verse 3 was already his, famine or not. That's what faith does with a dry season. It keeps sowing because it's not actually betting on the weather. But here's what we should sit with before we move on. What you reap is ultimately not determined by your conditions, but by whose blessing rests on your life. That's good news. But stewardship cuts both ways. The same principle that works in Isaac's favor works against us when we're careless about what we're planting. We're always sowing something. In our homes, our relationships, our thought life, our ministry. Sow anger, and that's the crop you're tending. Sow bitterness, and don't be surprised when it's the only thing growing. The question was never whether you're sowing. The question is, what are you sowing? Now we can kind of understand where the Philistines' feeling come from. They've been living there, feeling the hardships of the famine. And here comes a foreigner who's doing better than they are. And at this point, I want to make a distinction between jealousy and envy. Jealousy is a feeling about something that's yours. Envy is a feeling about something that belongs to someone else. Some translations actually render verse 14 as envied, which fits even more for what's happening here. And envy doesn't just want what someone else has. It would rather destroy the blessing than watch someone else enjoy it. That's exactly what happens in verse 15. These aren't dry, useless holes in the ground. They're perfectly good, life-giving wells dug by Abraham's servants decades earlier. The Philistines don't take them for themselves. They fill them with dirt. Nobody benefits from that. That's not strategy. It's spite. And that's what envy does when it's left unchecked. It would rather bury the blessing than let it stand as a reminder of what someone else has and it doesn't. And if we're honest, most of us have felt some version of that pull ourselves. wanting to see someone else's blessing covered over rather than celebrating it, because it reminds us of what we don't have. The text also shows us something else in verse 15. The Philistines didn't stop Isaac's wells because they hated him personally. They stopped them because they wanted what he had. The world will always want the fruit of a life lived under God's blessing. The peace, the resilience, the prosperity, without ever wanting the God who produces it. They tried to take the harvest and cut off the source at the same time. That's not a contradiction. That's what blindness looks like. By verse 16, the same unease shows up again, this time from Abimelech, and it's worth holding those two responses apart rather than flattening them into one. The envy in verse 15 and the fear in verse 16, you have become too powerful for us, might be the same anxiety showing up twice, or there might be two different reactions from two different groups of people. Either way, we can say their fear may have been understandable. Isaac was growing fast, and growth like that unsettles people. But understandable fear doesn't make a sinful response acceptable. Filling in a man's water supply and running him out of town isn't a measured response to a legitimate concern. It's what fear does when it isn't brought under God. Isaac doesn't fight the expulsion. He doesn't lobby to stay, negotiate for more time, or remind Abimelech of his rights. Sometimes God moves us, not through a vision or a burning bush, but through a door closing behind us. The confirmation of why comes later. It almost always does. I know what a door closing feels like without confirmation attached to it. Years ago, I had a stable job in front of me, and I chose to leave it to move into tutoring full-time instead. No guarantee it would work. There was no vision, no clear word telling me it was the right call. The confirmation came later, through the fruit, not before I made the decision. If you're waiting for certainty before you'll move, you may be waiting for something God never promised to give you up front. But Isaac's character is revealed in what he does between the closed door and the confirmation. He digs. Verse 17. So Isaac moved away to the Gerar valley, where he set up their tents and settled down. He reopened the wells his father had dug, which the Philistines had filled in after Abraham's death. Isaac also restored the names Abraham had given them. Isaac settled down and restored what his father had established earlier. Scripture doesn't hand us every name on that list, but we do know at least one. Beersheba, the well of the oath, named back in chapter 21 when Abraham and Abimelech made a covenant over that very water. Whatever the full list looked like, the point still stands. Filling in someone else's wells in that world wasn't just vandalism. It was an attempt to erase the evidence. Wells were proof of ownership, proof of a claim to the land. So when Isaac digs them back up and calls them by their original name, he's not being sentimental. He's refusing to let his father's legacy and the covenant behind it get buried along the dirt. The promised son restores what the faithful father established. Isaac's first move in the land isn't invention. It's memory. Every well Isaac reopens whispers something we'll hear stated outright later in this chapter. The son doesn't compete with the father. He fulfills what the father already started. But restoring old wells isn't where Isaac's story ends. Some of you know what it's like to have a source of provision or calling quietly cut off, not through your own failure, but through someone else's fear or resentment. Isaac's answer isn't an argument. It's a shovel. Verse 19. Isaac's servants also dug in the Gerar valley and discovered a well of fresh water. But then the shepherds from Gerar came and claimed the spring. This is our water, they said, and they argued over it with Isaac's herdsmen. So Isaac named the well Esek, which means argument. Isaac's men then dug another well, but again there was a dispute over it. So Isaac named it Sitnah, which means hostility. Abandoning that one, Isaac moved on and dug another well. This time, there was no dispute over it. So Isaac named the place Rehoboth, which means open space. For he said, At last, the Lord has created enough space for us to prosper in this land. 2 wells, 2 arguments. The shepherds of Gerar didn't even bother coming up with a new complaint the second time. This is our water again. If you've ever sat in a family or church dispute where the actual issue was never really about the thing being argued over, you already understand Isek and Sitna, hostility and argument. So restoration wasn't enough. Isaac still needed new water, which meant new wells. And new wells meant new ground. And new ground meant new conflict. See what he doesn't do here. He doesn't dig in, literally or figuratively, and fight for Isaac. He doesn't lawyer up over Sitna. Every time there's a dispute, he just walks away and digs again. Twice, he's lost ground that he had every right to keep. And then, without any negotiation or escalation, he goes to Rehoboth, and nobody says a word. Here's what makes that possible. Isaac can afford to lose Isaac. He can afford to lose Sitna. He was never going to secure the land God promised him by winning an argument over a well. The promise in verse 3 was already his before he ever picked up a shovel in this valley. So when he walks away from one well, he isn't gambling on whether God will provide another. He's acting like a man who already knows the answer. And we need to be precise about what kind of strength this is. Because it's easy for us to hear Isaac just folds every time and read that as passivity. Psalm 37 verse 11 says, "But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace." Jesus says almost the same thing in Matthew 5:5. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Same promise, same word really, just translated 2 different ways. Land, earth. Meekness was never weakness. It's strength under control, not strength seeking control. It's the ability to endure being wronged with the power to retaliate sitting right there in your hand. It's choosing not to use it. And the text itself tells us that Isaac wasn't weak. The Philistines are the ones who said it. "You have become too powerful for us." A weak man doesn't get told that. I've seen this at Pursuit too. We've never been formally endorsed by a denomination, and that's cost us real access, closed doors, rooms we don't get into. But the same lack of institutional backing is the reason we've had room to move that more established churches often don't. Same well, both ends. The pattern's worth sitting with. Isaac doesn't fight his way to open space. He yields his way there. Isaac and Sitna come from Isaac's own initiative, same as Rehoboth. But only Rehoboth goes uncontested. And that's not a coincidence. The text wants you to, the room he needed was never something he was going to win by force. It was something God was going to make. Verse 23. From there, Isaac moved to Beersheba, where the Lord appeared to him on the night of his arrival. "I am the God of your father Abraham," he said. "Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you. I will multiply your descendants, and they will become a great nation. I will do this because of my promise to Abraham, my servant." Then Isaac built an altar there and worshipped the Lord. He set up his camp at that place, and his servants dug another well. There's another layer here worth pausing on. Beersheba. This isn't a new place Isaac stumbled into. This is his father's ground. Chapter 21 already told us Abraham dug a well there, planted a tree there, called on the name of the Lord there. Isaac doesn't arrive at some untouched frontier to make a name for himself. He arrived at the place where his father already worshipped and picks up right where Abraham left off. The son doesn't need new ground to meet God. He just needs to return to where his father already stood. And that night, the Lord meets him there. Not after Isaac has secured the land, not after he's negotiated peace, not after he's proven himself. That night, right when he arrives, God doesn't wait for Isaac to earn the meeting. He shows up the moment Isaac gets there. Don't miss what God actually says. I am the God of your father Abraham. Before anything else, before the promise, before the blessing, God identifies himself by Abraham's name, not Isaac. And then, do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you. This is the same voice, the same words Isaac already heard back in verse 3 at the start of this whole ordeal. God isn't introducing a new promise. He's reminding Isaac of the one he already gave him. The one Isaac has been living inside of the entire chapter, whether he could feel it or not. Every well he lost, every accusation, every mile he had to walk to get here, none of it changed what God had already said. And then comes the reason behind all of it. I will do this because of my promise to Abraham, my servant. Not because of anything Isaac accomplished in Gerar. Not because he won an argument or fought for a well or proved himself worthy. Because of Abraham, Isaac inherits a promise he did nothing to earn, secured by a covenant he did nothing to establish. Notice that too. God doesn't lead with Isaac's name here. He leads with Abraham. Even the way God speaks to the son fulfills what he already promised the father. It's not a footnote to the story. It's the entire point of it. So what does Isaac do with that? He builds an altar. Not a house, not a fence, not a plan for the next wall. An altar first. Before he pitches his tent, before he secures the household, before he does anything to make Beersheba feel permanent, Isaac worships. That's the appropriate response to a word from God. Not analysis, not strategy, not even relief, though he probably felt some of that. Worship. And worship that waits until everything else is settled isn't really first at all. I wish I could stand up here and tell you I always get that order right. I don't. There have been real moments where I've built the altar before the tent, where worship genuinely came first. But if I'm honest, more often the pattern has been the other way around. Circling back to God after I've already moved, already settled, already started building, and not always promptly. I don't think the honest answer for most of us is a clean before or after. I think it's learning to worship in the movement itself, not cleanly preceding it or trailing behind it, but present in the middle of the transition, even when we didn't get the order right at the start. Only after the altar does Isaac pitch his tent, and only after that do his servants dig a well. Notice the order one more time. Worship, then dwelling, then provision, not the other way around. Isaac has spent this entire chapter digging wells to survive. Now for the first time, digging isn't even the first thing on his mind. Worship is. And here is where this whole chapter finally opens up past Isaac. Every single well in this passage, Isaac, Sitnah, Rehoboth, even the ones restored from his father, eventually needed to be dug out again. That's what a well in that world was. Water that ran out or got fought over or got filled back in. Isaac's whole life in this chapter is a cycle of digging, losing, and digging again. Remember where we started. Whoever controls the well controls life. Isaac spent this entire chapter chasing control of wells, and not one of them held. Even here at Beersheba, after the altar, after the worship, the very next thing his men do is dig again. That's the exhaustion this whole chapter has been building towards. A man doing everything and still stuck, redigging the same hole in the ground for the rest of his life. And yet the promise underneath every one of those wells was always Hebrews 13:5, before it was ever written. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Centuries later, in John chapter 4, a woman came to a well at midday to draw water, alone, because she couldn't face the crowds who knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. Jesus sat down at that same kind of well and told her something Isaac could have never said about any well he ever dug. Drink this water and you'll be thirsty again tomorrow. Drink what I offer and you never will. Isaac dug wells his whole life, and every one of them eventually ran dry or got covered over. There's not a flaw in the story. That's the story making a point Isaac himself couldn't have fully seen yet. No well dug by human hands was ever going to be the final answer to human thirst. Jesus doesn't hand us another well to maintain. He becomes the source himself. And unlike Isaac, everything Isaac dug in this chapter, that source cannot be filled in. It cannot be argued over and cannot run dry. He is the living water. We here at the Pursuit team love you. Take care and God bless you.